Welcome to Rebuilding the Republic, Conversations about America's Future, here at the New York State Writers Institute at the University at Albany. I'm Mark Koplik, Assistant Director. We're thrilled to be here with Valarie Kaur. She's a civil rights activist, thought leader, educator in the Sikh faith, award-winning filmmaker, lawyer, and founder of the Revolutionary Love Project. You can find out more about the Revolutionary Love Project via a link to her website here on this screen. Her social justice campaigns have helped win policy change on hate crimes, racial profiling, immigration detention, solitary confinement, marriage equality, and internet freedom. Her new book is See No Stranger, a memoir and manifesto of revolutionary love. She makes a compelling case based on science, religion, and personal experience that developing our innate capacity for love and compassion is the revolutionary force that we need to end hatred and violence and make a better world. You can read more about her and her book here on this page. You can also purchase a copy of See No Stranger via a link to an independent bookstore here on this screen. Valarie Kaur, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Mark. What a delight.
Before we get to the book, I'd like to talk a bit about the recent increase in anti-Asian violence. You've been working to help Asian communities respond to violence since the aftermath of 9/11. And after the Atlanta killings, you sent out some practical suggestions for action while the moment was still fresh. And we forwarded those suggestions to our email list of thousands. And now that the incident is fading from memory, what do you suggest we do now?
Well, it's not fading from memory if you're Asian American. Almost every day since the attack, I've been holding space, facilitating space for Asian American families, parents, activists, communities. And what I am struck by is that when the news starts to fade, the trauma kind of rises to the surface even more. People are managing incredible grief in their bodies, laced with rage around white supremacy and having to reckon with the kinds of traumas that our ancestors have long reckoned with. Some of us are feeling numb, and what I invite people who feel numb to understand is that your numbness, it's not a sign of you opting out as long as you are not letting it give way to paralysis. So the fact that people are continuing to show up to process is a sign of continued engagement. So my invitation is to allow however this moment is appearing for people, whether it's grief or rage or numbness, to be okay. And if people are feeling breathless, I always thought that my breathlessness was a sign of my weakness until I learned, a mentor told me, no, my love, your breathlessness is a sign of your bravery. It means that you are awake to what is happening right now, that the world is in transition. And what so many of us have reckoned with for the last 4 years, and for many more, much longer than that, the forces of white supremacy, patriarchy, tyranny in this country, that they're not going away with a new administration. And what happened in Atlanta and the rise of anti-Asian hate here in this country are a testament to that. So how do we find longevity in the labor? How do we keep showing up to the labor for justice? And so that's when I then invite people to imagine how to anchor their life in the ethic of love. Truly, Mark, after 20 years of being on the front lines of fighting against hate in this country, Balbir Singh Sodhi was the first person killed in a hate crime after 9/11. He was a family friend. That was 20 years ago. And for 20 years, I've labored with my community to fight hate violence in the country, state violence, and the wars abroad. And look, my babies are downstairs. They're 6 and 2, and here I am. I'm still going. The only way I have found how I can last is if I'm showing up with love for others, for our opponents, and for myself. So if my offering, this is why I believe revolutionary love is the call of our times.
In these conversations about rebuilding the republic, we've talked a lot about economic justice and protecting the rights of marginalized groups and being vigilant about the growth of hate groups. But your book is about something even more fundamental, which is changing the way we think about other people. Can you talk about that?
Yes, we need sound government. Don't get me wrong. Trained civil rights lawyer. We need strong policy, just policy. And I have had to come to reckon with the fact that no matter how much hate crimes legislation I was able to pass with my coalitions, no matter how many successful campaigns to shift policy, that sound government and sound policy is sufficient, but it is necessary, but not sufficient to transition us. That what we need is a shift in culture and consciousness. We need a revolution of the heart, and that is block by block work. That is heart to heart work, which is why my work is now focused on that cultural transformation. And when I invite people into the call to love, Mark, it's really an ancient call, isn't it? Jesus invited us to love thy neighbor, Muhammad to take in the orphan, Abraham to open our tent to all, Mirabai to love without limit. This call is ancient, and yet we live in societies that have been structured by hierarchies of human value that preserve the interests of one group of people over another. And here in the United States, white supremacy is that oldest hierarchy. Anti-racism is necessary. Anti-racism is the bridge. But love is the destination. Building beloved community is the destination. And that requires us to change how we have been trained to see. What if we saw no stranger? What if I could look upon the face of anyone and say, you are a part of me I do not yet know? That is dangerous. That's always been dangerous, right? Because if I see migrant child at the border as my own daughter, if I see Breonna Taylor as sister, Asian American woman in the spot as auntie, if I see George Floyd as brother, look what that does, right? It disrupts the status quo. It is the catalyst for political and social transformation, and it begins with how we see. I think part of my, the thing I've been wrestling with is that so many people are turning to anti-racism, and that is an amazing feat since last summer. But they're holding it as an idea, trying to say the right things, do the right things, instead of an embodied way of being. If you are orienting to your life and to all others with love, with revolutionary love, there's no way to be anything other than anti-racist. So I am inviting people into a new way of seeing, a new way of being. And that means, if we define love not as a rush of feeling, but as labor, fierce, bloody, imperfect, life-giving, it's a thing that we do for each other. If love is labor, then love can be taught, love can be modeled, love can be practiced. So my work is to say, okay, here are the tools to practice building beloved community together so that we can transition our country as a whole.
It's an interesting challenge to put your teachings into practice. And I've been trying this out at the supermarket, where I encounter all kinds of people in masks. And I've been making myself look at random strangers, all colors, shapes, sizes, and saying in the privacy of my own mind, this is my uncle, this is my aunt, this is my sister, this is my brother, this is my son, this is my daughter. And it's uncomfortable, but it's also moving, and it creates a small bit of connection that I otherwise would not have felt. Can you talk? Is this what you want people to do? And can you talk about it?
Oh, Mark, that is so moving to me. You are practicing this, my love. So I began to practice this about a decade ago as I heard Guru Nanak, the founder of the Sikh faith, the first teacher in the Sikh faith, Nako Bedi Nahi Bagana, I see no enemy, I see no stranger, were his words, his vision. So I began to walk down the street and say, I have to practice sister, brother, sibling. And it is uncomfortable because we are trained, it's undoing our training. Neurobiologists have shown us that within a split second, our minds decide who belongs to the in-group and who belongs to the out-group. Within a split second, I look upon a face and say, you are a part of me or you are part of them. And in the United States, the most dominant way we have been trained to see each other is through the lens of racial stereotypes. So Black as criminal, brown as illegal, Muslim as terrorists, indigenous as savage, on and on and on. And so to train your eye to see no stranger, to look upon the face of anyone and say, that is undoing not just a lifetime of training, but even ancestral training before that, right? So this is why it's not the first reaction that we have responsibility over. I remember shortly after 9/11, I was speaking, and an elderly woman came to me and said, white woman, she said, Valarie, I'm so sorry. When I saw two turbaned men at the train station, I became terrified. And I apologized for feeling that fear in my body. And I said, I was about to accept her apology when I said, oh, my love, if you're just seeing the turban and the terror and the towers flash over and over and over again, that's how you have been programmed. It's not your first reaction that you have responsibility over. It is your second and third and your fourth. It's your succession of conscious thought. And what the neuroscientists are showing us in these neuroimaging studies is that it's not enough to say, don't be racist, don't be racist, don't be racist. That actually increases the power of the racist reaction. You have to wonder about the face in front of you as belonging to a person. So I identify wonder as the building block for love. And wonder as something that we can practice, we can say to ourselves. And when we say it to ourselves enough, we begin to train our eyes to see differently. And you may say, well, what does that have to do with the power of white supremacy all around us? And I say, but if you train yourself to see differently, that influences who you sit next to on the bus, where you send your kid to school, what neighborhood you move into, who you vote for, what policies you allow to happen to people who, what the demagogues would have you think as other. That changes everything. So if we begin here, and then it ripples out there.
So some of our viewers, it's a fascinating exercise to undertake, and some of our viewers may be interested in doing it. And I do have some practical questions having tried it. So how do you make yourself wonder about a stranger's inner life without staring at them and making them uncomfortable?
Oh, Mark, what a luscious question. I find it only takes a split second for me to read a person. I'm walking down the street and I see eye, hair, mask, but I see clothes. And my body is making assumptions about them, right? Immediately, without conscious thought. But if I say sister, I don't have to keep my gaze on them, to study them, to figure it out. No, if I just say sister, I am cultivating a kind of orientation. I'm allowing myself to wonder what is in their grocery bag, what breaks their heart, how is this pandemic finding them? And that prepares me. It primes me to respond if they are in harm's way in that moment or in a future moment when the community that they belong to might require me to stand up for them. So I think when we're just passing each other by, just a quick glance, you're reading people anyway. But when we're sitting with each other, teachers with their students, teammates with each other, that's sometimes our hardest opponents or the hardest people to wonder about are the people we are in deep relationship with. I notice that as soon as I stop wondering about my husband is the day that our marriage starts to die a little bit. 17 years, you think you know a person? But if he is as infinite and vast to himself as I am to myself, that means that we are endless to each other. There are myriad opportunities to wonder about one another, and that keeps a relationship alive. For my children, I find that it's necessary. 6 and 2, they are changing so fast every day that I have to wonder about their needs in order to figure out how to care for them next. And this is why I don't begin the practice of love with empathy or with compassion, because they are vital tools. Empathy is to feel as another. Compassion is to feel for another. When my daughter is screaming, having empathy for her, imagining what it is like to be screaming like her, is probably not going to be useful for me. I need to wonder what is causing her to scream, how to address it, how to care for her, what to do next. So this is where, when I did the research about the tools for practicing love, it's like we begin with wonder. Empathy can follow, compassion can follow. Those emotions, those feelings can ebb and flow as long as we are returning to the primal act of wondering about another.
So another practical question, if you don't mind. So how can I use names like aunt and sister, uncle and brother, son and daughter without feeling like I might be misapplying these labels? I'm in my 50s. A 70-year-old woman probably can't be my aunt. How should, in the privacy of my own head, how should I be addressing these people?
Mark, I noticed that when I teach this practice to other South Asian Americans or Sikh Americans, my own community, um, it's it's almost a given for them, because in our culture we call any adult who's not our parents auntie and uncle. So my son I'm already training his eye to see that way. And of course, this is complicated when there are non-binary folks and folks who identify differently. And so you might not get it right all the time. But I think this goes to indigenous knowledges, this idea of kinship, that we're all part of one larger family, that it's enough just to establish that relation, even if it's not completely accurate in the moment. Because once you're in relationship and you're wondering, then you'll gain information for how they might relate to you. Now, for some people, family stuff is too fraught. There's too much trauma on family relationships, on their actual family relationships. For those folks, I invite them to say the mantra, "You are a part of me I do not yet know." And that works, Mark, not just for other people. It works for all living things, the earth itself. On Friday mornings, I take my daughter to the ocean. We have our own dates. And as we walk, we sing a song. Do you hear my dog barking?
That's okay. He is a part of me, or she is a part of me that I do not know. It's all
Do you
right.
mind if I let her out?
That's fine.
Okay, we can practice this. Okay, this is an opportunity. Practice this with even a creature like a dog. You are a part of me I do not yet know. Now, it might feel silly or funny to say it to a dog or to a houseplant, but it gets at the truth, doesn't it? That separateness is an illusion, that we all share a common ancestry, that the atoms that we breathe in our lungs have circulated in the lungs of long dead ancestors, that we were all made of molecules brought to life in the bellies of faraway stars. I mean, our interconnectedness and our interdependence is increasingly not just a spiritual truth, but a cosmological and biological fact. So when my daughter and I walk to the ocean, we look around and we sing the song, ants on a leaf, birds in the sky, sweet little bee, tree so high, wonder baby says, wow, whoa, you're a part of me I don't yet know.
That's beautiful. Yeah. And your dog is beautiful, by the way. And it's easy. It's easier to say it. I've said it out loud to my dog. I don't know that it's harder to say out loud to other human beings, but with a dog, everything is understood and forgiven, or so it feels. So.
Mm-hmm. And that's where the practice, you can get curious about it. When you say, for whom is this easy? For whom is it hard? Sometimes you may find a real reaction to saying this to those you see as your opponents. And I find that for myself too. And this is why I define revolutionary love as the choice to labor for others, for our opponents, and for ourselves. But we all have a different role in the labor at any given time. And so if you find, Mark, that you're saying this and it's to someone who is an opponent, whether in your community or a political opponent out there, and you are just, your heart's beating fast, your throat is closing in, that's information for you that this is probably not the time to wonder about them. Let other people do that labor. Like, this is the time to tend to the harm that they have inflicted on you or your people. And so loving ourselves, even parts of ourselves or parts of us that we do not yet know, is part of the practice of revolutionary love.
So some people who study extremists have told us that it's pointless to engage with them personally, that they can't be persuaded by that kind of interaction. And you don't agree with that. I found it terrifying, frankly, that scene in the restaurant where you approach some men who are saying some perfectly horrible things about brown-skinned people. But you do it anyway, even with the frustration and the potential failure. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Remember, at the end of the whole encounter, I'm like, I don't know if it was safe for me to do that. Safe emotionally or safe physically. And this is the idea where everyone has a different role at any given time. I'll tell you a story that illustrates this for me. January 6th was a harrowing day for our country, and especially for my family. My brother-in-law was trapped in the Capitol building during the day of the insurrection. He's a reporter for CNN, so he was locked in his office, and we were watching on the screen, right, in real time, on the phone with his wife and mother, everyone sobbing, hoping, praying that they wouldn't find him. He wasn't just a reporter, but a reporter who was brown. Only hours later, when he was whisked to safety, did I notice what I was feeling in my body, and I thought, this is terror. And this terror is familiar. How many times have I seen people I love in harm's way and have been unable to protect them in the last 20 years since 9/11, and for others, many much longer. So white supremacy is as old as this nation. That night, I received a call from a dear friend who helped build the Revolutionary Love Project with me. Her name, I won't tell, but she's very dear to me. And she said, I'm so sorry. And I said, I know. She said, my parents were there. I said, oh, are they okay? And then she said, no, you don't understand. My parents were at the Capitol building too, but on the outside of the building. My brother-in-law on the inside, her mother and father on the outside. And at that moment, Dr. King's vision that we are all bound in a single garment of human destiny just came rushing at me. As much as I wanted to hate those people, and I really did, Mark, I hated those people. As much as I wanted to see them as evil, as much as I wanted to see them as monsters, I had to see them through the eyes of their daughter, who saw them as deeply wounded, deeply misinformed, whose racist impulses were just fed all the way up to the presidency. That didn't make them any less dangerous. But it did suck the power from them. Because as long as they were one-dimensional monsters who were wholly evil, then they had power over me, psychological power over me. But if I saw them through her eyes, I could see them for who they were, frail human beings whose white nationalist rage is coming from unresolved grief. They are grieving the notion that this nation ever belonged just to them in the first place. It may not be my role to tend to those wounds. It is not my role to tend to those wounds, but it may be hers. It may be hers. And I think about how millions of people in this country, if we throw them away, who will find them? Who will radicalize them? What conspiracy theories, what echo chambers will take them? That is the recipe for a civil war, a deeper, more profound than what we've been experiencing. But if enough of us say, okay, it might not be my role, but it might be her role to be in relationship with those kinds of opponents, then perhaps over time, then we can create the critical mass of people to engage enough of us to take us across the threshold, to hold a vision for a nation that includes them too, to shows them that they have nothing to be terrified by. In the meantime, I have to love on myself and my family, right? If you are someone who has a knee on your neck right now, it's not necessarily your role to look up at your opponent and try to wonder about them. Your job is to take the next breath. That's your revolutionary act. But if you are someone who is safe enough or brave enough to tend to those kinds of opponents, like my friend with her parents, then we need you now. We need you in that labor. And I think about a lot of white folks right now who, I want this generation to be the generation who changes the meaning of whiteness in America. No longer synonymous with complicity or domination or blindness, but what if to be white in America could mean becoming an accomplice, not just an ally standing by, I'm here if you need me. Do I have permission to? No, you are an accomplice conspiring with us to reorder the world into an anti-racist, multiracial future. That's where a lot of folks are calling revolutionary love, my framework, the new nonviolence, because it makes room for our grief and rage, loving ourselves, and this idea that we all have different roles in the labor. Revolutionary love is not the sacrifice of an individual. It is the practice of a community. And we need all of us in the labor.
We straddle a profound political divide here in upstate New York, as many people do around the country, many universities do. This is a place where kids from white farming communities that went overwhelmingly for Trump meet kids from the multicultural metropolises that went overwhelmingly for Biden. Can you tell us a bit about your own fascinating childhood, which kind of bridges these worlds? And tell us how you learned to build bridges across cultural difference.
I grew up on the farmlands of the Central Valley in California. Peaches and plums, orchards, strawberry fields all around, cows and horses. It was really idyllic. You are a part of me I do not yet know. I could say that to the stars or the horses or the critters on the fields. Oneness, the sense of belonging, was my primary orientation to the world. I think wonder was very, very much nurtured in my childhood until I started going to school. And my family had lived and farmed on that land for a century. Deep, deep roots in California. My grandfather came by steamship from India in 1913. And yet when I was at school, that's the first time the racial slurs, get up, you black dog. First they were around my race, and then they were around my religion, that if I wasn't white and Christian, then I would not be saved. And it was my job to save my whole family from hellfire. It was a predominantly white, conservative, Christian hometown, and I felt like a problem that couldn't be solved. It was my relationships with my friends at school, my teachers even, who sought to convert me. And I remember, Mark, just feeling like I just wanted to solve it. I wanted to be like them, or I wanted to be fully, there was a local Gurdwara, but most of them were immigrant communities. My family was third generation. So my name is Valarie because I was born on Valentine's Day, not a very Sikh name. So here I am straddling two communities, not Sikh enough for the immigrant community of the Sikh community, not American enough for the wider community. And I hated the space I was in. I felt like I was in between. Until I began, it was only after I left, really, that and I went to college, that I understood that this space of in-betweenness was a space of great strength, that I could see things that other people couldn't see. I could tell stories from this space. I could build bridges from this space. And that's why I think, for many years I wanted to change my name to a proper Sikh name, and I've kept it. Valarie's deeply American and happens to be a holiday of love. This is all very coincidental that my life is now around this work. And Kaur, which means, sovereign woman warrior in the Sikh faith. So what does it mean, to invite all of us who have felt on the margins to own completely our identity, to embrace who we are, and then to say, no, the margins carry wisdom that the society as a whole might benefit from.
You celebrate your Sikh traditions and heritage a lot. throughout the book and in your life, while at the same time promoting the idea of a universal family. And is there tension in that? Can students feel comfortable celebrating their Irish heritage, their Italian heritage, without feeling that they are somehow separating themselves from others?
Yeah, oneness is not sameness. Oneness is not sameness. And I think that's part of the great lie that we've all taken in, that to homogenize, to oneness means homogenizing or blending into all one cardboard identity. No, it's like in our multiplicity. The idea of a melting pot even is such a dangerous metaphor, as we're all, as if we could all melt into one single identity. And what we really mean is to melt into a kind of whiteness. It's like, no, thinking of the country as a mosaic. Each of us carrying a particular piece that's shining and vibrant, that is part of the larger whole. I think owning and celebrating who we are, and the complexity of who we are, the depth of who we are, the multiplicity of even who we are, celebrating that, embracing that, is also how we learn how to celebrate and embrace others. If we can embrace the diversity inside of us, then we can embrace the diversity writ large all around us. And this is why that mantra, "You are a part of me I do not yet know," it's an orientation of humility. Like, I need to come to know you and your heritage and your beliefs, and because that's part of my larger sense of self. But it doesn't mean I have to lose who I am or merge who I am with you. We can be here together in this mosaic.
So you've created a practical tool for us, the Revolutionary Love Compass. We can show that on the screen, and can you tell us about it?
Yes. Oh, there it is. So I'm going to walk you through it, knowing that if anything intrigues folks, they can go to valariekaur.com to see the whole learning hub. So we had identified these 10 core practices of revolutionary love, drawn from science, from history, from my own lived experience, and put them up on a compass. And this, again, like anything, it's a tool. So use it if it's useful to you. If not, you can just let it go. So when you have it in your hand, you point the compass to others. The primary orientation there is see no stranger. How do you practice seeing no stranger? It begins with that first primal practice called wonder. We've been talking about it mostly all session. You are a part of me I do not yet know. To open ourselves to another person's story is also to open ourselves to another person's grief. So grieving, learning how to grieve with others, is the next practice. Not grieving to fix others or to say the right words, but to simply, there is no fixing it. There is only bearing it. And any time in history when people who have had no obvious reason to love one another have come together to grieve, that's when they give rise to new relationships, even revolutions. So grieving for communities in harm's way gives you information for how to fight for them, how to fight with them and for them. And that is the recipe for deep solidarity, the kind of solidarity that our movements can rise from. Shallow solidarity is I show up for you because you show up for me. Deep solidarity is I show up for you because I love you. And our movements are only as durable, sustainable as our ability to love one another through all the hardships and struggles. So wondering and grieving and fighting, and you can go back to wonder again. I move back and forth through these core practices when I'm in relationship with others. I turn the compass now to opponent. So what happens when the other in front of you is an opponent? Now notice I don't use the word enemy. An enemy is a fixed and permanent identity. And I want to say there are no such thing as true enemies in this world. There are opponents. There are people who oppose you, whose ideas or beliefs or actions oppose yours. The orientation there is tend the wound. Oh gosh, Mark, and here's the important thing. That first practice, that inner practice, is rage. It begins with tending our own wounds first. That we've too many of us have taken the lie that the opposite of love is rage. No, rage is a force that protects that which we love. Your rage carries information and energy, and the solution is not to suppress your rage or to let it explode, but to process that rage in what I call safe containers. Just like our ancestors did, right? Dancing, drumming, sweating, screaming, writing, being in community with each other. Once we are in relationship with our rage, we can ask ourselves, what information does it carry? And what does this mean for how I want to show up in the world? Some of us need to stay here, processing our rage, processing our trauma. For some of us who are safe enough to do so, we might be ready to wonder about our opponents. And this practice I call listening. To sit with our opponents, to listen to them is probably the hardest practice of all. But the purpose of listening is not to persuade them. The purpose of listening is to understand them, to understand their wounds. What are the institutions that authorize them? What are the cultures that radicalize them? And only once we gain that information can we then take what we know to the next practice, which is reimagine. Not resistance, but reimagining the context that allow our opponents to harm us. Raging, listening, reimagining. These are practices I end up using in my own home. When my babies are throwing a tantrum, I have to step aside to rage. I return to listen, ask what's at stake, reimagine the culture of our home. These are also practices I use as an advocate out in the world. Reimagining being the primary practice to support social and political change. Now, that kind of change, institutional change, that's hard work. That takes a long time, which means I turn the compass once more to ourselves. Our social reformers through history, they've taught us a lot about how to love others, how to love opponents, from Gandhi to King to Mandela. But this, loving ourselves, this is a feminist intervention. Black women like Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks, loving ourselves is not indulgence, but a form of political warfare. It's how we last. That first practice, this orientation I called breathe and push. That first practice is breathe. How are you letting breath in every day? How are you taking care of your body, your wellness? How are you breathing? Who are you breathing with? And then only when you are ready, how are you pushing? Sometimes it requires us to enter uncomfortable sensations or thoughts or emotions in order to evolve ourselves, in order to do the work of healing or forgiveness or reconciliation or apology. And there are moments when you say, I can't, it's too hard. And those moments I call transition. When we are in transition as individuals, how can we draw upon our own sources of wisdom to give us the bravery to stay in the labor? Breathing, pushing, transitioning. I think this practice is how I have come to love myself. It's really how I've discovered that I can last 20 years and another 20 years, and perhaps I can be like Grace Lee Boggs one day. The midwife who lived to 100. The midwife, she carries information for how to build resilience for any long labor, including the labor of building a more just and beautiful world. Loving others, loving opponents, loving ourselves, when we're moving through these practices throughout the seasons of our life, I find that it unlocks the 10th practice, which is like a sun radiating in the corner there, and it is joy. When we show up to our lives with love, our labors become porous enough to let breath in, to let joy in. And Mark, my conclusion is that, laboring for a more just and beautiful world with joy is the meaning of life. That is the compass.
I want to thank you, for your wonderful and transformative work. But I also want to ask you. We're a literary arts organization, and so I want to ask you one last question about writing, and specifically there's one sentence that I've wanted to ask you about since I started reading the book, which is this image of your husband and your father dragging a writing desk with ropes up a mountain in Central America, and you don't say anything anymore about it, but it's such an intriguing story. There has to be a lot to tell about that. So,
oh, Mark, Yeah, you know, my they s- I think it is just such an illusion that the author is a solitary mind. And I mean, some people must work that way, but like any great work of art, you know, it is a collaboration. Like any long labor, you need many midwives. Right? You need to birth in community and create in community. And oh, my mother and my father, my husband, they really created the community I needed to be able to write this book. I had been writing for 20 years. Since 9/11, I took my first book writing class after I came back from the road, knowing that there were stories that I needed the world to hear about my community and the aftermath of those attacks. And Mark, it was this book. It was this book, and it was this book that I was writing. And every year I created a new book proposal and sent it out, and no agent, no publisher was interested. No, there's no audience for this, or if you don't have your voice yet, and every year I just, 2003, 2005, 2007, 2010, 2012, every year I created a new book proposal, living the stories and writing them, living them and writing them. I didn't know what they all added up to until 2016, when I had become a mother and hate violence was skyrocketing and this last president took power. And I thought revolutionary love is the call of our times. And I wrote my proposal between the election of 2016 and the inauguration. And that proposal landed on the desk of Chris Jackson, who has single-handedly given rise to the new Black literary movement in this country. Ta-Nehisi and Ibram Kendi and Brian Stevenson and on and on. And he's the one who said, okay, I've been looking for solutions now. We've named the problem. I've been looking for solutions. Revolutionary love is a cultural intervention. And he gave me in advance, he gave me enough to be able to step back from crisis response, to step back from the front lines. And it was like the first time I had a room of my own. And remember, it came after 18 years of writing and believing that Oliver Wendell Holmes, don't die with all the music still inside of you. I thought I was going to die with all the music still inside of me. And here it took someone like him to say, no, you have a story to tell, and I'm going to make it possible for you to tell it. That's when I left the country. I went to the rainforest with my parents, with my son. And we were in such a remote part of the rainforest. Oh, and Mark, the rainforest, it felt like it was warm and wet and generative. It felt like the womb. Like it was so safe. And it was the first time in my life that I could see the country from the outside, and then tell truths about it and reckon with my own trauma and give language to the wisdom that was inside of me. And that year in the rainforest was everything. And it was only made possible because of my family. Hi. Hi, this is Ananda.
Hi, Ananda.
And while I was writing the book, I was pregnant with Ananda, and I was sitting at this desk, right, Anandi? And I was writing, and I wrote the last words of the book, and it was a letter to her. May joy be your lifeblood. And I stood up, and I immediately went into labor, and she was born 4 hours later. And her name, Ananda, means joy. So really, this book is about how to labor with joy. Yeah.
The book is See No Stranger, a memoir and manifesto of revolutionary love. It's available for purchase from an indie bookstore via a link on this screen. And for practical tips on rebuilding the Republic or rebirthing the Republic, please click on the link to Valarie's website and the Revolutionary Love Project. Thank you so much, Valarie Kaur.
Thank you, Mark.
Let me remind you that this and all our author interviews are posted on the Writers Institute's YouTube channel. And you can, I lost my spot. And you can find them at the conversation on our website, nyswritersinstitute.org. And please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. To our audience, thanks so much for tuning in. Be well.
Bye.